Might as well be Robin. Midakiapi. My relatives, my name is Dustin Baird, and I am the Native American Housing Program Officer here at Enterprise Community Partners Rural and Native American Team. I come from the Iron Cloud Teoshwe in Porcupine, South Dakota, and am an enrolled member of the Rosebud tribe. I'd like to start out by welcoming you all back to for the second webinar that we've proudly partnered with the New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition, one of the oldest formal tribal homeownership groups in America, and it was formed in 1999. This webinar is the first in a four-part series of webinars that we will be bringing to you, focusing on different ingredients that make up the stew of Native American homeownership. We are excited to be partnering with MFA of New Mexico, as Enterprise's history in Indian country started in New Mexico with our relatives from Okewinge back in 1997. Initially, the endeavor was intended for TA and outreach, but since then, Enterprise has been involved in small to large developments, around 50 of them, where $100 million was invested in Indian country, creating right around 1,000 units. This action led to major funder Fannie Mae, who was at the time the big player with as much as 40% of the market, to partner with Enterprise early on in this endeavor, which caused other investors, including the other three intermediaries, to start getting involved in developments in Indian country. As a tribal member who was born and raised on the reservation, I am proud to say that my employer, Enterprise Community Partners, boasts the distinction of creating the first permanent supportive housing project on trust lands. And this was in White Earth, Minnesota. Dreamcatcher Homes was a project. And it was created by a tribal member who had wanted to reunify families who had lost their children to the court system using ICWA laws, the Indian Child Welfare Act. The first stipulation to getting your kids back from social services is you must have decent home for the children to reside. The housing stock was depleted in White Earth and new stock was needed. Enterprise and others did their due diligence, took a leap of faith, and as a result, the project moved forward, bringing Ojibwe families back together. Since then, Enterprise has been involved in numerous projects in Indian country, being something that makes me extremely proud. And like I said, I'd like to welcome you back. We're we're really excited about these next four webinars. But before we get into this, I wanted to tell you all that we have a new team member on our team, the Rural Native American team here at Enterprise. Her name is Evelyn Immonen, and she comes from HAC, the Housing Assistance Council. And we are very proud to have her on the team. And she hails from, well, her family hails from Turtle Mountain, Ojibwe country. So with that, thank you, Evelyn. We really appreciate having you on the team and look forward to doing a lot of work in Indian country together. Here, I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Dave Castillo of Native Community Capital. Dave, are you on?
He's on mute.
All right, folks. Just some technical issues on my end, but hi everyone, and thanks Dustin for that introduction. And do I have some slides here?
Yes.
Hi, Adrian. Go to the fifth slide, please. Oh, excuse me. Let's go to the 9th slide. One more. There we go.
Okay. Dustin, should I give this overview now? Yeah, okay. So Dave Castillo here with CEO for Native Community Capital. We really appreciate being part of the coalition. As Dustin said, it's been going for years now, and we're kind of in our new iteration. Next slide, please. Oh, that's not the right slide.
We apologize, Dave. Just continue with how you had originally planned, and we'll catch up to these slides.
Okay. So I wanted to recognize partners in this effort. Wanted to mention, of course, MFA, as Dustin had identified. Eric Schmieder and Marvin Ginn had done a lot of work in terms of getting those set up and moving this forward. And so we're continuing that effort now. Also wanted to recognize the efforts that MFA has going now. They created a new website for the Homeownership Coalition, and I'd urge you to visit that site. I think we have a slide in here that identifies those 4 workshops that we'll do throughout the year. The idea is really to recognize that groups like the Southwest Tribal Housing Alliance, which is made up of the TDHE directors throughout Arizona and New Mexico, focus on all things tribal housing, and that is a very broad range of topics. And so we, as the coalition, the Homeownership Coalition, are focused exclusively on the topic of homeownership and development financing. So those 4 topics, those 4 webinars that we'll do throughout the year, and once we can do it COVID safely, we'll do some site visits as well. We'll really be focused on that topic of homeownership and development financing. And so today we have expert speakers on the low-income housing tax credit program. Now, that is historically a rental program, but I think what's really significant here is how much capital it can leverage from other sources, and recognizing, of course, that that tribes have historically been almost completely dependent on the Indian Housing Block Grant, which is made available through the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act. So I'll take that slide 9 now, I suppose. That's what I wanted to reference here in these comments. One more slide. Yeah, there it is. So, and this is really kind of an issue that literally and figuratively, right? I mean, we've got a bus stuck in the mud here after some inclement weather up on the Navajo Nation. And it's a good metaphor, I think, for where many tribes find themselves, unfortunately, in terms of access to capital and the resources needed to build new housing, whether that be rental or home ownership. And this is just a little graphic here that you're probably familiar with. If you didn't already know about the issue with the 184, it's a tremendous tool. Unfortunately, since its inception through the present day, most of those funds have gone to folks living off the reservation, which is not what was intended. What was intended with the 184 program as part of the NAHASDA legislation was to increase the number of the amount of mortgage lending available on tribal trust lands. And as you can see from that red line, that's off reservation activity, and the black and yellow lines are on reservation. So we're kind of stuck in the mud here in terms of trying to access new sources of private capital. And the other point to make here is that the new stimulus funds, the American Recovery Program Plan Act, as well as the new infrastructure funds, promises to invest over $30 billion of new federal funds into tribal economies. It's the single largest one-time investment of federal funds into tribal economies that most of us will ever see in our lifetime. But the trick is going to be deploying those funds effectively and efficiently. And what that means is being able to leverage those dollars, as well as put the programming in place and the organizational and the programmatic infrastructure to get those funds deployed. So as you can see here, our history is not great as far as the 184 program goes. Those dollars have moved away from Indian country and into urban areas. And so my plea here to you is don't let that happen to these ARPA dollars. Housing and housing infrastructure are a eligible use of these stimulus funds, and we must use every penny. Next slide. Now it is complex, right? There are a lot of moving parts, and for many tribal housing entities, this is not something that you may have experience in. Most tribes and most TDHEs are expert property management organizations and running low rent housing programs for existing housing stock, but not many have engaged in the development process, meaning building new housing year after year. I spoke with one tribal housing director not too long ago, and they've got a new project going up. And they said, this is the first time we built anything in about 17 years. And so I wish that were the exception, but that is more often the rule. Certainly, there are a number of tribes that have been very engaged in affordable housing development, and those that have recognize the processes depicted here in this little graphic that was put together by our folks here at the Enterprise Community Partners in their publication, which is listed there, Homeownership Programs in Native Communities. And so there are a lot of moving parts, but the lesson of today's webinar is that this information and these skills can be acquired either by renting the talent or partnering with organizations like Enterprise, or by, as we'll hear from one of our speakers, developing a tribal enterprise that can oversee these activities. And so the folks that we have with us today are experts on both those issues, and they'll speak to us further about their experience. Next slide. And just as a little bit of a glimpse about what we're going to be talking about, and one of the reasons why you might be excited to learn more about the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or any program that allows you to leverage your Indian Housing Block Grant, is depicted here. I always like to say about this slide, and this is 10 units of homeownership housing at San Ildefonso Pueblo. And this was done quite some years ago. I think it was 2014 when we did this project. So the cost of construction was much less at that time. But the point is, you know, when we had the grand opening and when we toured the units, they're beautiful. They're well constructed, they're modest, no doubt. But the quality of the construction and the aesthetics of the buildings themselves were really beautiful. What I like to say, however, is that from a tribal administrator standpoint, from a tribal elected leader standpoint, from a tribal housing practitioner, and as well as our federal partners and private sector partners, the beauty part of this project was this table in the lower right-hand side. This is and demonstrates the power of leverage, right? So although the Indian Housing Block Grant, as you see there, are grant funds that the tribe received on a formula basis, all the other funds that are listed there, the New Mexico IAD Tribal Infrastructure Fund, the RHAD Competitive Grant, the ICDBG Competitive Grant, and our loan, which was a Title VI, actually, that was leveraged based on those IHBG dollars to the tune of 73%. So whereas if the tribe only used their IHBG, this project could not have gotten done. But the other thing that's really important to notice here is that the tribe was able to get 5 different federal agencies or public sector agencies, departments, or private sector partners to agree to commit funds to this program. And I think I joked about it on another webinar that I did. I said, you know, I have a hard time getting 5 of my colleagues to agree on where to go for lunch on any given day. How much harder must it be to get 5 different federal agencies or departments within agencies to agree to commit close to 2.7 million, close to $3 million for a housing project for a tribe in rural New Mexico. That means that the tribe did an exceptional job of presenting the project, establishing their credibility, demonstrating the capacity that they had to build the project on time, on budget, and they were able to do that. And the fact that they were able to get commitments of these other sources is testament to that. So again, today's presenters will talk about the moving parts and some of the nuts and bolts associated with being able to leverage your IHBG dollars to build rental housing and even home ownership housing, although today we will focus on the low-income housing tax credit program. So I think those are all my comments, Dustin. Next slide.
That was the last. Dave.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Adrian, would you go back to slide 5, please? Okay. Since 1998, Enterprise has been involved in LIHTC projects, including projects housing Native Americans, including the safe and sanitary homes of the Sicango Village Estates, located right across from the Rosebud Sioux Tribes Casino, which I'm very thankful for. When we were planning this webinar and thinking of speakers, I thought to myself that Brian Windley would be perfect for this webinar. He is our Vice President of Acquisitions in Enterprises Housing Credit Investments. Let's get started with our expert. Welcome, Brian. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dustin.
All right, so let's get started. First question, what is the low income housing tax credit and how does it work?
Good question. So the housing credit is a federal affordable housing production program that subsidizes the new construction or rehabilitation of rental projects. The program was enacted way back in 1986 within Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code. And then it's been significantly modified both in 2008 and in 2009. Different from other affordable housing programs, the subsidy is built into the project financing as opposed to being offered directly to a tenant or resident, like, for example, the Section 8 program. The subsidy is made available through the IRS in the form of a tax credit. The IRS allows a certain amount of tax credits to be allocated to each state every year using a per capita based formula. The program is administered at the state level by housing finance agencies. In New Mexico, that's the New Mexico Mortgage and Finance Authority, or MFA. Can you hit the next slide, Adrian? This is kind of a nice, simple visual of how the program works and who some of the players are. In a nutshell, as I mentioned up in the upper left, the federal government allocates credits to the states as you work down on the left side. Developers then, represented by the actual housing project, apply to the state housing agencies for credits, often in a competition with other developers. If they're awarded, they sell those credits to an investor, represented by the limited partner picture there. And this can be done either directly or through a syndicator like Enterprise. The proceeds from the sale of the credits are then used to help pay for the construction, acquisition, and rehab costs for the project. This equity reduces the debt burden of the project, and that's the mechanism that allows for rents to be kept at a, quote, artificially low level as compared to market rate housing, and allows the affordability to happen. Let's go to the next slide. So how do the credits actually work? And what do the projects look like? So projects serve renters at or below 60% of the area median income. If the project uses a somewhat newly enacted feature of the program, which is income averaging, the rents can go up to, and households served can go up to 80% of the area median income. Investors earn a dollar for dollar credit against their federal tax liability. They also benefit from other tax losses like depreciation or deductions. Generally, the credits are received for 10 years, and the compliance period is 15 years minimum, but some state agencies like MFA will extend that compliance period. At MFA in New Mexico, it's a 30-year compliance. So the project has to stay in compliance for a minimum of 15, but in many states, it goes well beyond that. As Dave mentioned earlier, often the credits are then combined with other leveraged resources, permanent debt in some cases, or other affordable housing resources such as state housing credits. Many states have housing credits of their own. New Mexico is one of those states. Solar or energy credits, home funds, CDBG funds, Federal Home Loan Bank, NAHASDA dollars. There's a number of programs, both federal, state, and local, that can, quote, fill the gap on deals and round out the capital stack on any given project. Let's go to the next slide. So the tax credit projects, or the credits themselves, finance, like we mentioned, the new construction or rehab of rental projects. Acquisition, in some cases, there are certain rules and things that have to be followed in order for a project to qualify for credit relative to acquisition. And we're not going to get into that level of detail here, but just know that in some cases, acquisition, the cost of acquisition can be partially covered with credit equity. The housing itself can serve families, special needs tenants, SRO units, elderly, seniors, elderly. Just about any rental population can benefit from the credit and from projects that use the credit. They can be located in urban, rural, or suburban locations. And there are some additional tax incentives for projects that are in very difficult to develop areas or in QCTs, qualified census tracts, and those are identified by the IRS and the federal government on an annual basis. So some projects that meet those criteria can get what we call a 30% bump in credit. Let's jump to the next slide. And just quickly, not to get too much into the weeds on the restrictions, but developers that get the credits awarded, they have to elect to serve at a minimum 40% of the units at 60% AMI or 20% of the units at 50%. And that's a minimum election. What we see is typically projects are 100% affordable, either at 60% or 50% AMI. There are times where we see projects with a smattering of market rate units. And like I mentioned before, some projects are utilizing income averaging now, which allows them to go up to slightly higher AMI levels. And then the rent restriction is really based on a 30% affordability formula that is really a HUD threshold. And the rent and income limits are published annually and are derived from that HUD rent and income data. Most state housing agencies will publish that, or you can see those rent and income limits on Novogradac's website or other industry websites. Hopefully that helps answer the general question about the credit, Dustin.
I appreciate that, Brian. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Can you explain the 9% versus the 4% differences in LIHTC? What kind of subsidies are used in the 4%? Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, the 9% credit is basically known as the, quote, competitive credit. Without getting into the details of how the eligible costs are determined, the 9% credit uses a higher multiplier when determining the amount of credit a project can get. And it allows for more subsidy than the 4% credit. Most states have at least one competitive round. Some have multiple competitive rounds for the 9% credit, while and then the 4% credit is typically awarded on a rolling basis. So it's a, quote, non-competitive credit. It's coupled with projects that are utilizing tax-exempt bond financing. And again, it's awarded on a non-competitive basis. There are some requirements that most state allocating agencies set up as threshold. So the reason I say, quote, non-competitive is because technically you have to meet threshold items to get the 4% credit. Some people like to say it's automatic. It's really not. And again, the 4% credit you get less subsidy in those deals just simply because of the 4% multiplier in calculating the credit. Maybe in a subsequent training, we can go into the really nitty gritty, dirty details of how the credit is calculated, eligible basis, and things like that. But for purposes of this, I think just knowing that the multiplier is lower on the 4% credit than the 9. Typically 4% projects target higher income households as well, and therefore they can charge higher rent, allowing them to support more permanent debt. That's another difference between the two. Even with that higher debt amount, 4% projects often have to rely, like you said, on soft sources, some of which I mentioned earlier: home, CDBG, AHP funds, other state, federal, local soft dollars that help fill in the gap.
Got you. Thank you. Thank you for that. So a lot of times whenever we start talking about LIHTC, insiders talk about the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan. What is the QAP, Brian?
Well, like you said, the QAP stands for Qualified Allocation Plan. It's a document that each state housing finance agency, again, the agency that administers the program for each state, is required to publish on an annual basis with public input. So every state goes through a process, typically in the third, fourth quarter of every year, drafting the QAP for the next year. And there's usually public hearings and public input on that QAP. The QAP outlines all the tax code requirements of the LIHTC program, but also provides details about how the specific state will administer the program in that state. So in New Mexico, if you look at New Mexico's QAP, and I think Adrian can put up the link to the QAP or the page on the MFA website where you can link to it. The housing priorities and state selection criteria section of the QAP really lays out the threshold requirements for consideration and scoring criteria for that competitive 9% program. And then it also goes into some detail about how MFA administers the 4% credit. Of course, like I mentioned before, for the 4%, it has to be a tax exempt bond project, but there may be other threshold criteria that MFA requires. And so all those requirements related to the tax credit program, whether it's a 9 or a 4% credit being awarded, is covered in the QAP. And like I said, New Mexico does have a state housing credit. So that state housing credit is also described in detail in the QAP.
Good answer. Good answer. Thank you so much for that. Lindsay Ponta, I just checked our Facebook page and we are not live. Maybe you can give us some help with that.
Yeah, I am working on it right now. My apologies. But we should be live in just a minute here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Moving on with our expert, Brian Windley. Low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC, are one of the primary resources for developing affordable rental housing nationwide. Yet LIHTC is substantially underused in Indian country. Why is this? Can you answer that?
That's a really good question, Dustin. I don't have a definitive answer on this. I suspect it's a combination of factors, and I also suspect that it can be different from state to state. But a few things that I think are factors. One is that, at least in my experience, there's a lack of prioritization or quote set-asides in state QAPs. So we just talked about the QAP in New Mexico. At least my personal observation is that although QAPs will often carve out different priorities or policies at the state level for special needs populations, elderly housing, family housing, whatever it might be, I haven't seen a lot of states set aside or carve out specifically tribal projects, prioritize tribal projects. So I think that's part of it. Some states might do that. So I don't want to say that that's not a blanket statement. but a lot of states don't, and that might be one reason. Another is, a relatively low expertise, lack of development understanding and expertise within tribal entities, whether that's tribes themselves, tribal housing authorities, or other tribal organizations. It's a very complicated program, and to the extent that the tribal entity, the tribal housing authority doesn't have experience, I think they can feel locked out of the process. And so gaining that experience is really important. There are organizations out there like ours and many others that can help educate and bring entities along that are interested in developing. But I do think there is some lack of development experience and understanding that contributes to why the low-income housing tax credit is underutilized. Finally, the economics and logistics of building in rural communities, including on tribal lands, are very difficult. Often projects are smaller in size, not allowing for economies of scale. Development costs are higher due to labor shortages and/or material costs. We're seeing that a lot right now. So just the rural nature of most tribal deals, I think, makes them potentially more complicated and more challenging to structure.
Great answer. Great answer. The lack of expertise. I could just see Dave Castillo squirming in his seat whenever he talked about that. But okay, so where should a tribal program start if wanting to pursue a LIHTC project on tribal lands? Where would they start?
So I think, and there may be other opinions on the panel, but I would start with identifying and quantifying the housing need. So conduct a needs assessment. You'll need that anyway for MFA down the road if you decide to apply for credits. But starting with identifying the need, I think, is the most critical. Second, I'd get buy-in from the community on what the housing need is, using data to support that, and getting buy-in that the housing credit as a potential tool is the right tool or a good tool to try to address that need. So getting political buy-in, stakeholder buy-in is important, whether it's a tribal deal or whether it's a deal in a small community or even if it's an urban deal. That's an important process. And I think most state agencies require applicants to show somehow that they've engaged with the community. If not already in place, implementing housing strategies and policies that support the community's housing goals and the use of the credit as a development tool would be important. For example, making sure that the tribal entity that will be doing the development has some autonomy and can conduct the development successfully. Key leadership with LIHTC experience if possible. You can always, as somebody said earlier, rent the expertise, use consultants. But if you have some leaders in the tribal entity, tribal housing authority that have done LIHTC, that's even better. And then making sure that there are professional standards for leasing, property management, and maintenance, just demonstrating that the entity that's putting the project forward is, has the ability to manage, maintain, lease, stay in compliance with the program. If the tribe or housing authority lacks housing credit experience, like I said, engage with consultants early in the process. Don't wait until you've tied yourself in knots with the complications of the program. Engage groups that have experience early on so that they can help you through the process. And then all related to that, engage early with potential stakeholders and partners like MFA, lenders, equity providers, soft lenders, grant makers. All those stakeholders, all those potential partners in the deal can help steer you in the right direction, help identify potential pitfalls and barriers to development. And it's not just the development process that has pitfalls and complications. Ownership and management come with complications as well. So most of those stakeholders can help educate folks and help kind of steer you in the right direction to make sure that it's the right fit for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, we could go on and on and on about LIHTC for me anyhow. I think we need to follow up for with Brian Windley on this one, but we're going to hand it off to Mr. Dave Castillo. Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate you showing up and providing your expertise on this.
Thanks, Dustin.
Brian, Dustin, thank you so much for that overview. I think one of the things that really stood out for me in that conversation was just the idea of all the moving pieces. And I know that a lot of tribal housing directors might say, you know, I spend 60% of my time working with community members on, you know, just maintaining their homes and keeping the rents coming in, and the other 40% with tribal council and sometimes tribal court. And where do you find the time, you know, to get into the weeds of everything that something like this requires? And it's for that reason that I'm really excited to introduce RJ Berry, Richard Berry. Most of us know him as RJ. It's exciting because I think New Mexico already has a tremendous amount of capacity in the area of tribal housing. Some of those tribal housing directors are with us now, but if you've just driven up to Santa Fe, you've seen some of the development on the left-hand side there. And if you go out to you know, Jemez Pueblo, you'll see a big development that's taking shape there. And well, Laguna is no exception. Laguna is very fortunate to have Laguna Construction Company. Mr. Berry is the CEO. He's a contractor, you know, by training and throughout his career, but he's also spent 2 terms in the Roundhouse at the state legislature there in New Mexico, and 2 terms as mayor of Albuquerque. So he's got a really good view on housing issues generally as a practitioner, and also from a policy standpoint. And now he has the task of leading Laguna Construction Company with a considerable development project over the next few years, some of which will include using some of those stimulus dollars that I talked about. So I think we're among friends here, and certainly among individuals who can talk shop and would like some of the detail, but please be aware we may have some tribal elected leaders or housing commissioners who may be at the starting point of understanding how to start an affordable housing development project or low-income housing tax credit project. So RJ, based on what Brian talked about and your experience right now with Laguna, how would you introduce the opportunity and the work ahead of you?
Sure, Dave, thank you very much. And Dustin, thank you for the invitation. Already learned a lot just from what Brian was talking about this morning. So let me tee this up a little bit. And I want to thank Dave too for 2 things. 1, inviting me today, and 2, really for coaching me up as, you know, new to this side of this equation. So as Dave mentioned, I grew up rural in the Midwest. In Nebraska, I had an opportunity to be a legislator in a urban rural state, and then I had a chance to be a mayor of an urban area. So when I had an opportunity to join the team at Laguna, and the leadership asked me to jump on board to help facilitate some of this work, even though I had seen LIHTC and new income, new market tax credits, and I'd seen this from a policy side and from an executive branch side. And I had certainly built and designed buildings throughout the Southwest United States for decades. Jumping in as the first LIHTC, pretty massive learning curve. And so I'll echo a little bit about what Brian said, about renting some help. And I've learned the value over time of having a team of experts around you. And of course, we've got tremendous capacity at Laguna. We've got, I'll just say, strong leadership there, a strong desire to do things for the people they serve. So all of these components that were talked about earlier, we have. And now we have, there's a once in a generation opportunity with ARPA funds. And I think if you are part of an entity or a tribal leadership that has some of those funds, just as someone who has had to make policy and executive decisions over time, I certainly would think that's a worthy way to do that. So, but let me just go back to this idea. I'm the new guy here on being a facilitator of a LIHTC project. So let me just give you 3 things I've learned, and I'll try to keep it short, and we can have a conversation if you want. 3 things that have struck me. I'll call them the 3 C's. You know, there's critical issues, there's coordination issues, and there's capacity issues. And from a critical issue standpoint, and for the practitioners and the old hands, people that are doing this for a long time, you're going to go, yeah, well, you know, I get, yeah, sure. Well, this is maybe more for the new people. First of all, LIHTC, you know, it's a long-term commitment. Every state, as was mentioned earlier, you know, prioritizes projects that commit to long time periods. In New Mexico, it's 30 or 35 years. And you have to be able to keep those commitments made over time. So as you're looking at, you know, as we're looking at a project, and I say we being Laguna Construction, I am not in tribal leadership. They are my shareholder and boss. And so just from my standpoint, I know that they're having to look at long-term commitments. So this isn't just build it and you're done. It's not just a grant that you have a deliverable and it goes away. You know, there may be a little bit of wiggle room after submission, but the more planning and time and development of your team is going to make it easier to maintain those long-term commitments. And along those lines, you know, LIHTC, from what I can understand, everybody here, Dustin and Dave, you know, LIHTC is it's 100% subsidy on the front end of the development of the project. The tribal entity and the Tribal Housing Authority will have the ongoing maintenance responsibilities for these units. So when these dollars come in, they help you get the project built. But I believe, you know, we will have to maintain these units in the long term. And I do not believe there's any additional NAHASDA dollars to do that. So that's part of the pro forma equation you have to put together. Make sure you've got cash flow to maintain these and a plan to maintain these and a team to maintain these, knowing that people come and go inside organizations. They start, they retire, they change positions. So, you know, taking a long game approach on this, I think is a way to take advantage of what is, from what I can see, far and away the biggest leveraging tool that a tribal entity has to build or rehab large projects. So if you believe that NAHASDA has stagnated and there's no real way, you know, short of taking on hard debt to develop bigger projects, LIHTC is designed to help you do that. You can leverage this 85, 80%, 90% sometimes of a total project. If you can couple that with other dollars you have, it's a massive leveraging tool. So those are critical issues I've seen. Let me just jump to coordination, Dave, real quick. As you heard earlier, and Brian mentioned this takes a lot of people. It takes a big team, people that understand development, people that understand financing, people that understand the ins and outs of your specific charter or your specific tribal rules and regulations. You all got to come together and coordinate, and then you have to go get general partner, which in our case is LEDME. At Laguna, your TDHE, you have to have investors, you have to have your syndicators, you have to have community leaders. And at the end of the day, I would just say, as a former elected official, you've got to have the people that you serve on board. You've got to, you know, do what they need, build what they need. And that takes a lot of deep dives in the community. And we're just really getting started on that, looking forward to that on our side of the process. I would advocate always for a good consulting group to work with you for 2 reasons. One is they do this all day, every day, and you have, you know, you're have a team that has to do lots of things, but you have specialists that come in. It's kind of like, you know, anytime you need a specialist, it's good to have a specialist. And then the other reason is you need them for a period of time, and then you don't need them for other periods of time. So for highest and best use of resources, I've just always felt like when you need a specialist, hire a specialist. And then you don't have a long-term overhead issue that's involved with that as well. So I think 2 key issues for success that I'm starting to identify are you need time and you need the buy-in that was mentioned earlier. You've got to have the people that you serve on board. You have to have the political will. You have to have strong leadership. I feel so fortunate to have strong leadership at Laguna Pueblo that understand the long-term impacts of what they can do for the people that they serve. I will end with capacity. What steps are we having to take from Laguna construction side to ensure that there's the capacity to compete for the allocation and then remain in compliance? In my side, we are kind of the development partner. So we're going to help work through the LIHTC project. We're going to help develop the project. We're going to hand the keys off. Our TDHE LEDME will then take this, and they will be responsible for a long period of time to keep in compliance and to maintain the building. We'll certainly be there to help, but you have to have that capacity. I'm fortunate that we do. Tribes and TDHEs are already managing, complex projects. Nahasda is apparently no walk in the woods, right? I mean, it's complex in and of itself. So maybe one thing to think about is it's not the complexity and it's not the internal capacity of people that work in the tribal entities. It's a bandwidth issue. What do you do when you're adding 30 units all at once? And that leads to this idea that having strong policies are important. If you have strong policies and you're executing on those policies, it's so much easier to take things to scale, just in general, whether it's construction, whether it's government, whether it's tax credits, getting those policies, having some time to think about those, understanding that you're going to have to maintain this project in the long term. So if there's a $25 a month rent on every unit, that's going to be kind of a tough ask. You're going to have to think about other revenue sources. And then just making sure that you can manage cash flow. LIHTC will come with some additional rules and outside investors, and you're going to have to mix those entities together. And, if your TDHE is extremely proficient at policies and execution, you're just going to be a long-term winner in the equation. So those are some things I'm noticing, Dave. I'm sure they say that the people who've been doing this a while are like, yeah, well, you really are the new guy, aren't you? Well, yeah, but it's super exciting, especially when you take LIHTC and you combine it with the generational opportunities with funding that the federal government's providing. Boy, it's an exciting time.
Thanks, RJ. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you and just taking this challenge on. I used to be the director of a tribal department, and a lot of time my staff would kind of complain about, getting complaints from community members, getting complaints from landowners, getting complaints from tribal council members. And I had to remind them, hey, all of us know folks that are really suffering, in some pretty horrendous situations on the reservation. And we've got the privilege of working on how to resolve those issues. So as a manager, I said, let me take the hits for you from council and let me make sure that you can get your job done, because it's a lot of work to do. And we need kind of the expertise, the creativity, the energy, and the experience that, that you bring to this. So it's really an exciting time with the ARPA funds coming online and having so many resources available to Indian country that have been underutilized, really. I mean, that's kind of one of the big lessons here. You might recall, I don't remember the provision in Nahasda. I believe it's in the old legislation, it was, I think, section 901(2)(c), but there is a provision in Nahasda that states that tribes shall leverage their Indian housing block grant dollars with other funds, and they shall establish how they'll do that. Well, Nahasda has been with us for over 25 years now, and far too few tribes have figured out how to leverage those dollars. Remember, Nahasda is a regressive funding formula, which means as your CAS, your current assistance stock units go down, the less IHBG dollars you'll get. That's by design. And what that means is that you'll need to figure out how to find other dollars to shore up what you're missing from that reduced grant amount. And LIHTC is a great way to do that. It's just one tool. 184 was mentioned, Title VI was mentioned. There's tax-exempt bond finances, ARPA dollars. There are state programs as well, USDA 502 and 504 as well. So there's just a whole range of resources out there for us to utilize. And I think RJ will invite you back to give us an update on the project, maybe sometime down the road, and we'll listen about lessons learned. And Brian, we'll look forward to hearing from you about new investments that Enterprise may make to syndicate some tribal tax credit dollars or provide some technical assistance. I know that you guys are on the look out on the hunt for good projects to invest in, and that your pricing on those credits will be competitive. That's always the issue, right? How much can we get for each one of those credits? So we'll look forward to having those discussions. And I think there was a question that I saw in the chat there. I think that was for Brian. It says, Brian, can you talk about any examples you've seen using LIHTC in lease to purchase models for home ownership? What are your thoughts on this model?
So we have done, I've seen it, and we've done some projects utilizing LIHTC that at the end of the compliance period revert or convert to home ownership. And that it is possible to do that. There are some state agencies that they can't really keep you from doing it, but they don't love the model. Colorado's one of those states, actually. So it may take some convincing, it may take some lobbying to allow, given what state you're in. In New Mexico, I think you can do it. I think it's supported in the QAP. And really the key is making sure that you have those leases, the lease to own provisions up front, and they're fully disclosed, they're well thought out. As a syndicator investor, we would review those. There will be lots of eyes on those to make sure that those are fair for the tenant and that they meet the requirements of the program.
Thanks, Brian. Dustin, I know we had some questions on the Facebook Live. Possibly, do we want to go over those? I'll head it back over to you to kind of take us through the rest of the agenda here. Thanks for having us on.
I appreciate you. RJ Barry, boom, drops the mic. Thank you for all you're doing for our Laguna relatives. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And we, my board is also allowing us to stand up a little entity over here, Dustin, to work with other tribal entities on just navigating solutions. So, it's an all learn, all teach environment, right? And we're available. And if anybody has things that we can help with, things that worked or didn't work for us, mistakes that we made, successes we had, gosh, my board has allowed me to do any of that. So just, you can get my contact information. We're happy to see anybody succeed anywhere. So we'll be happy to jump in anywhere you'd like us to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, RJ. Tribes helping tribes. Hashtag that in your post. All right. So next question is for Brian Winley. Okay, so this comes from our Facebook chat. Finance projects must meet eligibility requirements for at least 30 years after project completion. What does that mean to us, the average Joe who's renting?
So to the person that's renting it simply means that their unit will be affordable for that amount of time. That MFA and the federal government is requiring that the developer that built the building you're in maintains that level of affordability. So if you're going to live there for 5 years, you know that affordability is going to be there for 5 years. It doesn't go away. So like you said, to the average Joe renting, it's that promise of affordability.
Awesome. So would that be another step to fight gentrification?
I don't know what you mean by that. Clarify.
So I'm sorry, that was my personal thing. But like in Denver, we're seeing a lot of gentrification, right? Where a lot of our like a lot of different pockets in Denver, the housing costs are rising, and families that have lived there for 20, 30 years are moving out because of, it's just too expensive to live there.
Yeah, certainly the tax credit program and other affordable housing programs can help to the extent developers coming into an area that's being gentrified or is sort of ripe for gentrification. It's a tool, exactly like you said, it's a tool to help maintain that affordability in the neighborhood, in that area. It gives the promise to the residents that are there. Yes, we might be outsiders. Yes, we might be building a new project, but it's affordable, and it can be used to keep the residents that are in that neighborhood in that neighborhood.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And just so you know, RJ put his email in, and it's rj@lagunaventuresnm.com. rj@lagunaventuresnm.com. We'll put that on our Facebook page as well. I'm gonna turn it over to Charlene, and she's gonna give some announcements real quick. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Charlene Rosales. For those of you who do not know me, I am a program specialist and tribal liaison for the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. And really quick, we're just gonna pull up some important 2022 LIHTC dates for you. And Adrian, I believe that is slide 4.
Can you see it? It should be on slide 4.
Okay, I think mine is stuck. I could see the PowerPoint, the full application.
It has upcoming events calendars from the
Oh, it
MFA
is?
page.
Okay, mine just be stuck then. Okay. So for the 2022 LIHTC round, registration for the QAP training is gonna open on September 27th and end on October 18th. And this QAP training is very important. It is mandatory. We'll give out little certifications saying that you attended, and in order to have a complete application, you will need to include that QAP certification in your application. Right now, we're kind of busy. We're in the process of getting our QAP approved by the governor. So that will happen in, for our board approval, it'll be in October, and later on, depending on where the governor is at, how fast you can get to it, we'll have that ready for public view, which will be posted on our website. For those of you who this is your first time and you want to see learn more about the LIHTC and all that we include within the QAP, we will have a LIHTC fundamentals training on October 21st. And after that, our official QAP training will be on October 25th. Once we get through that, we will be requiring an intent to submit development synopsis that will be coming before the application, and that will be due on December 20th. And after that, we will start accepting applications on January 14th, and then we will get through, see how many we can get, and the last day to submit those would be on January 28th, and then we'll start going through those and seeing how many we get. I'm hoping for some tribal projects. We haven't had that many this past couple of years, so it'd be great to see some. And at the bottom here, we have our link to our LIHTC page. Oh, and one more thing. For those of you who know Catherine Turner, she has been promoted to our Assistant Director of Housing Development, and we brought on Jeannie Redondo, who came on a couple weeks ago, and she is our new LIHTC Program Manager, and y'all will be able to get to meet her soon at our QAP training if you decide to join. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlene. Sheila, would you send us away, please? Sheila, you are on mute.
There you go. Unmute myself. So on behalf of the New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition, we'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar. A special thank you to our panelists, RJ Berry with Laguna Ventures, Dustin Baird and Brian Lindley with Enterprise, Dave Castillo with Native Community Capital, and Charlene with MFA, Mortgage Finance Authority, Robin Wolf, and Adrienne Norwood behind the scenes. And don't forget to check out our Facebook and our webpage for any updates or upcoming webinars. And don't also mark your calendars for October 13th. will be, the Southwest Tribal Housing Alliance will be holding their triennial meeting October 13th. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any questions or comments. And thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Bye, everybody.